going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today I want to talk to you about a book that I read, Tales from King Arthur by Andrew Lang. This is a strange book. This has a copyright date of 1993, but I looked into this. This was actually written in 1902. This was originally printed under a different title, something about folklore or mythology, and it was reprinted with this title. But if you go into this book and you look at the language that's used, it's pretty clear that this was written a long time ago. Andrew Lang was born like in the 1850s, I think. So this is kind of an older story, and basically it is taking some of the most well-known episodes of the King Arthur mythos and trying to put it all into one singular timeline. And this is a pretty short book, I think about 140 something pages, and there's illustrations in there, not a whole lot of illustrations, but a few. Some of them I had seen before. I didn't realize where those illustrations came from, and I don't know if these particular illustrations came from somewhere else before they showed up with this book or not. I don't know. But anyway, like I said, this is a very strange book because I am a pretty big King Arthur fan. You probably know that if you've watched any of my videos before, but this simultaneously surprised me and also felt very familiar and comfortable to me. There were so many things in this book where as I was reading I would say to myself, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen next, and then something very similar to what I knew was going to happen would happen because I've read so many of these stories before, or variants of these stories before. And then sometimes something completely different would happen that would take me completely by surprise, and I had no idea that this thing was going to happen. Some really strange stuff here. For one, you've got at the very beginning of the book, Arthur, he pulls the sword from the stone, and that's how everyone knows that he is the rightful heir of Britain. Everyone knows about that. And then later, that sword breaks. A lot of people, if they're casual fans of King Arthur, they may not realize that the sword in the stone that Arthur pulls is not Excalibur. He pulls a sword from the stone, and then when that one breaks, later he gets another sword from the Lady of the Lake, and that's Excalibur. And when he gets that sword from her, she says, in the future, I am going to ask a favor of you if I give you this sword. And that favor can be whatever I want, and I can ask it whenever I want. And then immediately, this book jumps into the introduction of Sir Balin. Now, normally, the Lady of the Lake will show up after Sir Balin is released from prison, and she says, Arthur, I want you to kill that guy. And then Sir Balin will behead the Lady of the Lake, and then Arthur will banish Sir Balin, and then he goes on his adventure where eventually he accidentally kills his brother, and his brother accidentally kills him. That's usually how it happens. This book introduces the Lady of the Lake. She gives Arthur Excalibur. She says, I'm going to ask of you a favor in the future. And then we get into the introduction of Sir Balin. We find out that he just got out of prison, and then he pulls this sword out of a scabbard that nobody else could pull because apparently he was the most pure-hearted guy in the world. Don't ask me how that works since he just got out of prison. And then we don't see the Lady of the Lake again until nearly the end of the book. It does not get into her feud that she has with Sir Balin. Basically, he had killed her lover. There was a whole thing there, background before Arthur had even become king, I think. It doesn't get into any of that. So if you are unfamiliar with the Arthurian mythos, it's going to be really strange if you jump into this book and the Lady of the Lake says, I'm going to ask a favor of you later, and then you never see or hear of that again in this book. So it was really weird for me because I was familiar with these characters and some of the scenarios that they are involved with that is being reprinted here but also kind of trimmed down, so we're not getting everything, and that wouldn't have even added a page to this book, so I thought it was really strange that they cut that part out. But then you also have stuff like Lancelot and Guinevere. Pretty much everyone on the planet knows that Lancelot and Guinevere were a thing, and that was a big reason why Camelot fell down. Everything fell apart because of their relationship with each other. This book is strange because it hints at that for a good long while. During the Grail quest, it talks about Lancelot's sins, and he repents of those sins, and then later it says he returned to his sins, but it doesn't say what his sins were. And then nearly the end of the book, after the Grail quest generally happens close to the end of Arthur's reign. After that, then it talks about how ever since Guinevere first met Lancelot, she has loved him. But they do not have a sexual relationship in this book, and that really surprised me. Usually, they are actually having a sexual affair with each other, and that is one of the big links in the chain that leads to the fall of Camelot. That is not how it is portrayed here, and I was very surprised by that. And I'm wondering if it's because this was written in 1902, and maybe this was intended for children, and so maybe they didn't want kids to be reading about these two main characters having an illicit affair at the time. I don't know. Maybe if this was written a little later, they would have been a little more free to be a little more saucy with it. I'm not really sure. But basically, Guinevere loves Lancelot, but they are not acting on this love, and Lancelot loves Guinevere. And then Mordred and Agravain, they're whispering in King Arthur's ear, saying that there is an affair going on. And then Guinevere summons Lancelot to her room. I guess it's possible that they were going to do something when he got there, because before he can even make it into her room, Mordred and Agravain and like 12 other knights ambush Lancelot, and then things progress basically the way that I'm familiar with, where Lancelot kills a whole bunch of them, and then he escapes, and then Guinevere is about to be burned at the stake for adultery, and then he comes back with some of his friends, he kills even more knights, and then he rescues Guinevere, and then he has basically killed all of Gawain's family at that point, so then Gawain wants to go to war with Lancelot, and then everything falls down from there. Mordred takes over the throne while Arthur is at war with Lancelot. So basically, this portrays the fall of Camelot in a very similar way that I have seen it portrayed by many other authors. I have read several books that are the entire reign of Arthur condensed down into about 150 pages or so. I've read bits and pieces of Le Morte d'Arthur. I haven't read the whole thing, but I have read summaries of the Arthurian mythos that portray everything that you see here basically the same way, except this does it while also trying to keep Lancelot and Guinevere blameless. So it's a really weird portrayal of those events. But basically, this does kind of what I thought it would do. It starts off with the beginning of Arthur's reign, where everything kind of happens the way that you think it's going to happen. He pulls the sword. There are some rebel kings who don't want to bend the knee to him. Then all that gets sorted out. He gets the new sword. And then you get some unrelated quests that could basically be ordered in any way that you want. If you decided that you wanted to write down the events of Arthur's reign, basically everyone has the beginning happening the same and everyone has the ending happening the same, but a lot of times people will kind of just sort the middle stuff in whatever order they want. Pretty soon after you get done with all of the beginning stuff, Arthur getting the sword, stuff like that, getting married to Guinevere, then you get the story of Gareth and Lynette, which I found to be odd that Andrew Lang felt that was important enough to include in this book. I was familiar with the story of Gareth and Lynette. I had read a version of that before, and it's a fine story. I don't know if I would say that it's in the top 10 King Arthur stories. I think there are other characters that this book could have focused on a little bit more, but they do introduce Gareth and Lynette here, and that's a story that I could probably do a whole video on that and how I find that one to be really odd. You do get a lot of characters who are in armor, full armor, and so they're in disguise, and then they go out there and they do something and nobody knows who it is. And that's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way because, long story short, nobody really knows if King Arthur actually existed. There are some historical documents that mention a Arthur, but it's very likely that if he did exist, he was actually more of a war chief and he had a small band of soldiers and he was out there living in tents fighting off the Saxons, but he didn't have a big glorious castle. If he existed, it would have been around the 500s. They did not have actual metal armor back then. They had leather armor. That was the closest thing they had to armor, and so anytime you see a character who wears a suit of armor, for example, in this picture here, Lancelot is in full, like, medieval armor from, like, the 12 or 1300s, and that's because you have someone like Thomas Malory who wrote Le Morte d'Arthur, and he wrote that basically putting the characters in the contemporary time that he was writing that story. It was set sometime in the past, but he was writing these characters as if they existed in that time. At the time that he lived, people wore armor like that. Knights wore armor that looked very much like what I just showed you. And so you have these stories where Lancelot goes out onto a joust, and he's in in disguise and nobody knows who it is. And I have never really liked those stories because in my headcanon, again, everyone has their own interpretation of King Arthur, but in my headcanon, this stuff all happens around the 500s. I know that if you look at all of the King Arthur stories, 99% of it is fiction. Really, all that we know is that there might have been a guy named Arthur. The Gododin Chronicle talks about how Arthur and Mordred fought at the Valley of Camlan. We don't even know if they fought each other. We don't even know if they died. We don't even know what the fight was about. We don't know anything. So a lot of the stuff that we have about King Arthur is fake. But I still don't like it whenever we have stories where Lancelot is the mystery knight and he goes out there and he swaps shields with somebody and then there's a joust, because let's be honest, in the 500s they probably had more important things to worry about than jousting with each other in their spare time. They probably had to constantly be fighting off against the Saxons and stuff like that. Anyway, so that stuff in this book, there's a little bit of that there with Sir Balin. We do get a story with Sir Balin, and I like that. I like that we get stories here that show some of the knights that your average ordinary bear might not be familiar with. If you don't know a whole lot about King Arthur, you're probably going to know who Arthur is, Guinevere, Lancelot, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and Mordred. Those are probably the characters that you're going to know about. They all appeared in the Merlin miniseries in the 1990s. That was basically my introduction into King Arthur. And so if you know as much as I did when I was 12 about King Arthur, then you're going to know who those characters are, but you may not know who Sir Gareth is, or Sir Balin. Percival, Galahad, they're in here. They get some stories. So I like that this is a good entry-level King Arthur story. If you don't know anything about King Arthur, this is a good, solid place to start. It shows you some characters that you may never have heard of before, but then as you dig deeper into the mythos, as you read more about these characters, do a little bit more research, you'll see, oh, okay, that's weird. Andrew Lang had this thing happening this way, but everyone else has it happening a different way. Anyway, I find it to be very fascinating. It's an easy breezy read. I got done with this in less than a week. It's very difficult for me to read prose. In general, whenever I pick up a novel that's like 500 something pages, I am immediately overwhelmed, and then I look and the first chapter is 60 pages long, and I think to myself, I'm never ever going to be able to read this. Well, this book, the first like 30 or 40 pages, the chapters are like 2 or 3 pages long. And then if you get into a chapter that's a little bit longer, the story of Gareth and Lynette is quite a bit longer than all the other chapters that come before it. You get into a chapter like that, and then you get like 4 or 5 illustrations in that chapter. So it was pretty easy for me to read this, much more so than it usually is for me to read prose. So if you're out there somewhere and you're wanting to dip your toes into King Arthur stuff and you don't know where to begin, I would recommend Andrew Lang's Tales from King Arthur. So that's about all that I have to say about this book. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to check out everything else that I do on this channel. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.